Get started. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us tonight. I do appreciate the fact that many of you are navigating your own family lives in order to be here tonight. So thank you so much for making time to join us. And I do appreciate the fact that you've had, many of you, a long day's work, and you are also trying to navigate the COVID situation in many parts of Australia. So thank you very much for making the time to join us at this professional learning opportunity. So I'd like to formally begin now by welcoming you to the 6th New South Wales Family Daycare Association webinar PD in Your Pocket series. Now, of course, many of you will have joined this opportunity over the last little while. So if this is your 6th one, congratulations. It's fantastic that you're here. My name is Catharine Hydon and I'll be your facilitator for this evening. And a big thank you to all of the team who've put this material together tonight. It's a great subject matter, something really exciting to sink your teeth into. So if you're not haven't been to one of these before, we'll tell you a little bit more detail about how to join in and what other things you can do. But one thing you can do is make sure you have a pen and piece of paper somewhere handy so you can write down a couple of thoughts that you might have about how to take action after tonight. So the first thing we're going to do is to take a little moment to acknowledge the traditional owners on whose country we're on. And we're going to hear from the amazing educator and Aboriginal leader, Tracy Lynn Bostock. Some of you may know her work, and she's going to do an acknowledgement of country and welcome for us. But I would also like, on behalf of the New South Wales Family Daycare team, to officially welcome you tonight and also to acknowledge the traditional owners on whose country we're all collectively on. The New South Wales Family Daycare Association is on the land of the Gadigal people. So we acknowledge, of course, that elders have been helping us to think about teaching and learning over many, many decades. Always was, always will be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land. Let's hear from Tracy.
I'm going to begin with an acknowledgement to country and the land that we are now gathered on. I acknowledge the Indigenous custodians of the Gadigal land. I acknowledge the Eora Nation, and I acknowledge the elders of the land.
Okay, we might keep going there.
Past and present. I acknowledge the spirits of the land, and I acknowledge the children of the Gadigal land. I also would like to acknowledge the Aboriginal peoples and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Together, we can touch the ground of the Gadigal land, we can reach for the sky that covers the Gadigal land, and we can touch our hearts in the care of the Gadigal land. Hello, my name's Tracy Lynn Bostock. I'm a descendant of the Bundjalung Nation, which is my grandmother's country, and the Mulunjali clan, which is my grandfather's country, of the same nation.
What a fantastic opportunity to hear from.
I'm going to begin.
Here we go. I'm just going to pause that for a second. But we're also going to hear from some amazing children who are going to also share a little bit about some of the work that they're doing in relation to acknowledgement of country. And of course, you may be doing some things like this in your own family daycare setting. So this is a really fantastic opportunity. I think this one is a centre-based one, but I know some of you are probably doing some really interesting work with your children and exploring that context and the work that you're doing in acknowledgement of country in your family daycare home.
What does it mean when you hear the clapsticks?
We go to the sandpit. We say acknowledgement.
Can you make the sound of the clapsticks? Well done.
You sit down next to your friends. You put your hands on the land.
Every morning at 10 a.m, one of the staff members taps the tapping sticks. That tells the children that we're ready for our acknowledgement.
Who do you share the land with?
The Aboriginal people. The Americh people.
Good morning, everyone. All right. Everyone, hands on your land.
Do you know why you say the acknowledgement?
To be respectful. Respect. We at Movie Street. We like to say thank you.
We'd like to say thank you
to the Catharine and Wongal people. to the Catharine and Wongal people for letting us share your land.
For letting us share your land.
Promise to look after it,
We promise to look after it,
the animals and the people too.
the animals and the people too.
Very touching to see that this preschool is doing such a fantastic job. Just makes me feel really great.
Who do you say the acknowledgement to?
The Gadigal and Wongal people.
The children have an understanding of who the Gadigal and Wongal peoples are, and we're learning every day what they represented in our community.
Do you think all children should look after the land like you do?
Yeah.
What about parents or grandparents?
Yes.
Yeah? Why do you think that?
Because you should do that.
Well, that's a fantastic way to get started. And you can see how strong those children are in their understandings of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives and their local Gadigal people, which is fantastic. And did you see the language that was articulated in the bottom of that video? Really extraordinary. So indeed, if you are one of the people who are doing some acknowledgement of country in your family daycare context, that might be very much similar to what you are doing. If you haven't yet thought about that, that might be something that you want to consider as we move into this conversation around culture and the way that we can incorporate cultural perspectives into our family daycare context. So before we get started though, and talking a little bit more about some of the conversations we want to have today, I want to talk particularly about this PD in your pocket series. So again, some of you are probably really familiar with this process now, but I want to point out a couple of things to remember. So you'll see the link on the screen at the moment. So it will help you find out a bit more information. So make sure you click on that. But importantly, you would have received a resource book, and we sent you a link to a specially prepared booklet at the beginning of the month. So hopefully you've all had a chance to read that, and you had a week or so to read it on your phone or your iPad or your computer. And if you didn't receive it, you can find the link on the screen, and you can find where that might be. So if you're watching the presentation, you can link that way. If you're listening to this as a podcast, you can find the information that we're talking about on the New South Wales Family Daycare Organisation's website. So that's www.newsouthwalesfamilydaycare.org.au, and follow the links to the PD in a pocket culture. So you'll be able to find some information there. But if you get stuck, just reach out to the team and they'll point you in the right direction. You will have also received some great content. So you will either be participating in this webinar live, so welcome everybody who's live today, or watching it as a video or listening to it as a podcast. So lots of different options for you to participate there. If you're participating in it live, remember you can always go to the PD in your pocket page on the website and watch or listen to it later. So you can come back and refresh your memory. Some of the things that we talked about you might like to revisit. You can watch it later so that you can share it with a colleague and have a bit of a conversation, hear it again. This session is short, and it should be only about 45 minutes. So for those of you who are participating in the live session, it'll be followed by a bit of an interview. So not just with two experts who will share some of their perspectives, so you can watch some of that information. And if you're watching the video or listening to it as a podcast, you can find the links to the website, and then you can find that information and you can enjoy a 20-minute session where you can ask some questions about the topics we've talked about today. After this session, you'll receive follow-up readings, so make sure you have a read of those. It's really great to be able to dive into some of these ideas in more detail and see whether it resonates with some of your own understanding or how you've expanded your thinking. Specially chosen for you, so specially chosen for you because you're in family daycare and some of the context work that you are working through, and to explain the topic in more detail. And of course, you can also discuss this on the Facebook page. So find the Facebook page. I'm sure many of you are already in that space. When you enrolled, we invited you to join a Facebook page, a closed Facebook page, with lots of other educators and family daycare people. You can discuss the topic there. You can tell us what you thought about today. You can find out more information. You can share the way that you acknowledge country. You can share your different perspectives about some of the work you've been doing. So I'd love to hear about that. I feel like already some of the great conversations are happening, but we'd love to have more of you on board. So please join that space, talk to each other. And if you have any questions about the PD in your pocket space, you can always email and find out a little bit more information at info@newsouthwalesfamilydaycare.org.au. So let's keep going and find out a little bit more about what we're going to do today. So we're covering tonight the important area of cultural competency. We're going to talk a little bit about what we mean by cultural competency, but as we do that, we're going to think about why it's important. Why would we concentrate on thinking about cultural aspects in the work that we do with children and their families? What needs to happen to provide and demonstrate culturally competent practice? So what do family daycare educators actually do in their practice on a daily basis to be able to facilitate those conversations? So we're going to think of some different practical examples. You can share some practical examples in the chat if you would like. Love to hear you share some of those ideas with us. And also then we're going to think about how you might implement any changes in your practice. Some of the video presentations that we'll hear will help you understand a bit more practically about what you might do, and also how we can celebrate diverse cultural and linguistic perspectives in the context of our work in family daycare on a daily basis. So really keen to know about some of those perspectives. This session, of course, has been funded by the New South Wales Department of Education Sector Development Program. And it's not just for individuals who need to be culturally competent, it's also organisations. So as part of Family Daycare New South Wales work in the cultural competency space, I'd like to start to ask you to not only read the booklet, but also talk to each other about those ideas. And if you're not confident in English, then this is an opportunity to listen to the podcast. Could you also use the chat, as we've said before, to share some ideas? And if you're confident enough to think about what that might look like, talk a little bit about what you've experienced when you read the booklet. So we'd love to hear your responses to some of those ideas. So share those ideas and think about those different perspectives. And of course, if you want to talk to your colleagues about it after today, you can of course have those conversations in your first language, which is fantastic. We'd love to talk and think about that together. So many of you, of course, speak a language other than English. You might speak many languages, of course, and reading English is not necessarily as easy for you as reading in your first language. It would be very reasonably practical to translate the booklet into 300 languages that are spoken in Australia. So it's a very exciting opportunity there. But we've provided this webinar. It's not possible, for us to translate into all those different languages, but the webinar and video is a good way of hearing the information. It is in English alone, but you might also be able to share some of that information and speak with it with your colleagues to be able to understand what it is that we're talking about in this context and have those conversations with your colleagues. So a great way to dive into the cultural competency component and think about what it might look like in the family daycare context. So let's keep going and see if we can find out a little bit more about cultural competency. So we'll start with the big question about what cultural competency is, and a really good way of exploring that idea is to start with some of the big ideas and the way that it's understood in the National Quality Framework. Now, of course, this quote will be something that hopefully many of you are familiar with. You'll recognise it from the early years learning frameworks and, of course, My Time, Our Place for school age care. Cultural competency is much more about awareness of cultural differences. It's about the ability to understand and communicate effectively and interact with people across cultures. Now, of course, the reality is that the Australian community is full of diverse cultural backgrounds. Many people come from different places, and we all have a cultural heritage that we bring to the interactions that we have within the context of family daycare. In family daycare, building cultural competence is an ongoing process that requires family daycare educators and coordinators to be aware of your own personal cultural values and beliefs. So, for example, for me, I have a rich cultural heritage which comes from England and Ireland. That's my cultural heritage. My family has been in Australia. They were migrants to Australia over several decades, several years. And my grandfather came to Australia when he was 10. So we've all got a rich cultural heritage. It's important also for us to know something about what that looks like and what values and beliefs underpin your own cultural heritage. So it's really important to start with yourself. Then, of course, you acknowledge both similarities and differences in the people around you. and indeed in your own family. And we have a positive attitude to difference, something that we want to talk very early to children about. And we also understand that we gain knowledge from different cultural practices and perspectives. And I just think about my own experience over many, many years about how many things you incorporate into your own life that are positive in relation to the diverse cultural and linguistic heritage that is now makes up contemporary Australia. We also develop cross-cultural communication skills. We figure out how to communicate with people whose cultural background is different from our own. So how do we figure out what things we share and what things we are different, and how do we appreciate the similarities and differences in our cultural understanding? We also understand that culture relates to many things. It's not just about your ethnicity. It's not just about the language you believe in, the language you have, or the food you like, or the celebrations you participate in. It's actually about everything you do. In fact, there's a little saying that culture is like being a fish in water. So you only really know that you're out of your culture when you're out of the water. So you dwell in your culture all of the time. And it's not just food, and it's not just clothes, and it's not just the things you celebrate. It's everything about you. It's all of your cultural values, things you think are beautiful, things you appreciate in the family, and things that you would do on a daily basis. So it's much more sophisticated perhaps than people think. Sometimes people think that it's just about a celebration, but in fact, actually, it's a whole range of things. It's also for educators and coordinators to think about the delivery of curriculum, decisions around teaching and learning that respect the cultural identity, values and attitudes and languages and opportunities that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people bring to our Australian community. So we've just had NAIDOC Week. Some of you will have been a part of that celebration, and others of you will have incorporated lots of different opportunities for celebrating Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives in your practice. But these are opportunities that we would look to see embedded across the whole program. Great family daycare educators incorporate multicultural perspectives or diverse cultural perspectives in all of the aspects of their program. So they ensure that educators from different cultural backgrounds get to experience opportunities for celebrating and being a part of cultural difference across the program. Great family daycare services ensure that their services are culturally competent, so they have an understanding about the way to engage positively with culture, and that families and educators from all cultural backgrounds are understood, they feel a sense of belonging, and they're effectively interacted with. So we start to build a sense of belonging for everybody. The Educator Guide to the Framework for School Age Care puts it very nicely. It says, at the heart of cultural competency is our aspiration for everyone to be strong and confident in their belonging, in their being and their becoming, through understanding and empathising, affirming the opportunities that they have. Cultural competency is about our will and action to build understandings between people, to be respected, to be open to different cultural perspectives, to strengthen cultural security, and to work together towards equality and in the opportunities that we experience. I remember a long time ago when I first met Anne Stonehouse. Some of you might know her work. Anne Stonehouse was an amazing thinker and educator in Australia, and she said to me, and she's written about this also, that cultural competency is a very practical thing too, because the reality is you will work with people who are different from yourself. You might marry them. You might work with them. You might work with them in family daycare. You'll be working with different people, and building up children's capacity to work with people who are different will help us live a better life and help us to build a more inclusive community. So it's a great skill to be able to navigate that space. And of course, the whole idea of cultural competency rests on relationships. There's another way to say this. Basically, it's about saying we build relationships of respect that include people from diverse cultures so that we feel like we grow up in a place where we belong, and that we send very strong messages that culture is an important thing that's important to you, and that's something that we can celebrate in our diverse communities. Culture is a fundamental building block of identity for young children. So we want children to grow up strong in their culture, to be proud of their culture, to take that into the rest of their schooling life and to be proud of that and to help it form the basis of their interactions into the future. In fact, increasingly, if we are culturally competent, we can navigate the changing landscape of contemporary communities. And we also think here that we want to help children to build a healthy sense of who they are and where they belong. Children also must have the opportunities through access to early childhood education and care services that nurture and celebrate and reinforce the culture that they have and help them to get to know other people and figure out what that cultural context looks like for them and how their identity sits beside other children's and other cultural identity. Cultural competency is an important part important task for individuals and for organisations, and we also need to work together to be culturally competent as an educator, and your service needs to work together to be culturally competent. The word competency is an interesting one because competency suggests that you get to a particular place and you're all done and you're competent from that moment on. What I want to suggest to you in my experience is it's a work in progress. We're working in that process all of the time. We're becoming more capable in our cultural knowledge and understanding as time progresses. So don't worry too much if you feel like you're not at a point when you absolutely got everything sorted and you know all the things you need to know. It's a work in progress, something we learn about over time. So why is it important? It's a couple of really good things to think about in this space that I think we've probably already covered a little bit, but I think it's worth pausing a little bit and saying, what do we mean by cultural competency and why is this important? So here's what cultural competency does in practice and why we want to spend some time thinking about it. Again, for some of you, this is something that you've thought a lot about because you've got children and families from diverse cultural backgrounds in your family daycare home, which is something that you have built strong knowledge and understanding of, but you might find yourself in a situation where someone asks you questions about your cultural competency and the inclusion of culture in your practice. So these are some good, important things to think about. So family daycare educators' cultural competency is important because it promotes children's sense of identity. So we talked about that before. It builds children's confidence in who they are and their belonging to families and groups and communities, gives them that really strong sense of respect. And you heard some of those children talk about that at the beginning of our conversation today. It helps children learn to respect and be comfortable with difference and diversity, what Anne Stonehouse said about the practicalities of working with people who are different. It supports multilingualism. So what do we mean by that? It supports the way that we help children to maintain their first language. And you know, I don't have to tell you, you know this, that we have a rich diversity of languages that are spoken in Australia. And it is fantastic for us to celebrate that and to help nurture children's maintenance of their first language. So in us celebrating that, then children maintain first language, they maintain connections with family, and they maintain connections with their granny and all their relatives, perhaps in different parts of the world. They could do that on social media and a whole range of different platforms now, keep connected to their family and feel strong in who they are. And of course, if you lose your first language, you lose the capacity to talk to your relatives in their first language. So it's something really fantastic to maintain, great for brain development as well. It also, the commitment to cultural competency, promotes inclusion and equity for all children. And this is about children's right to feel strong about their cultural identity and their right to belong and be part of the Australian community. So I want to honour and respect that. As an educator, you probably first came across the term cultural competency when you did your qualifications. So you might have done a Certificate 3 or your diploma. By getting a Certificate 3 or a diploma, you signed off as having certain competencies in this area, and you were judged to be able to do some things. You were judged to be able to reflect on your own cultural identity and biases, so you understood a little bit about where you fit in that process. You identify and develop cultural competence. You can research Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and you can find out a little bit what's happening in your community. You can support individual cultural identities of children. You can create environments that support children's cross-cultural understandings and relationships, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. You can support implementation of inclusive learning experiences, and we're going to hear from two experts who are going to help us understand that. And also to support children in developing confidence and the strength in their personal and cultural identity. So lots of things that you would have studied. Now, it might be a little while ago since some of you studied, but some of these ideas are expectations of educator practice, reinforced by the National Quality Standard. Cultural competency is not something you just achieve. You get to a particular point and get a certificate, like I said before, but it's something that you would work on over time, and you need to learn and unlearn some things too, and watch your assumptions and use reflective practice. We often have to unlearn some racist attitudes that we might have. You might have stereotypes that play in your mind that you might have learnt from your family, and we might have to think about the way that we understand particular cultures and the assumptions we make. We're also constantly required to learn more about different cultural ways of knowing and being, particularly Australia's First Nations people. So lots of really exciting things to learn about here, but lots of different opportunities. And in fact, the more we experience this, the more benefit that we'll offer in some of the ways that we explore curriculum and teaching and learning opportunities for young children. So how do we provide opportunities for children to demonstrate, or how do we provide opportunities for children to be part of that process and demonstrate our cultural competency in family daycare? Lots of different ways we can do that. And again, some of you have some really good ideas, and we'd love you to share some of those on Facebook. So if you've got some really good strategies that you think really help to explore that space, and we'd love to hear from you. And we want to share a couple of those with you tonight, because they hopefully will inspire you to do some different things and try some new ideas. So lots of further reading available. So we are in a really fantastic time to be able to share information and ideas. So you've got your further readings. Please check those out. Get the booklet out, see it, some different ideas and strategies that you might use. And of course, there's also the Fair's Fair book, which our amazing colleague Lisa has put together, which gives you some insights into various ideas here. So I want to share a couple of things with you. So how do you promote and provide and demonstrate cultural competency in your family daycare service? The book pictured above, in fact, by Red Ruby Scarlett and Lisa, who have met in a previous family daycare pocket series. So remember that, hopefully. We'll have shared the following ideas with you in that publication. Cultural competency in family daycare may have educational programs and practices that acknowledge the original people of Australia, the First Peoples of Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in your local community by doing an acknowledgement of country. So you saw one of those at the beginning. If you're not doing something like that now, you might find inspiration in that little video. Lots of different things online to have a look at, and you might want to share some of the words that you use on family daycare on the Facebook page to inspire your colleagues. Other times, family daycare educators consider the racial backgrounds or the ethnic backgrounds of the children who are enrolled in their service. So what is their ethnicity? You ask the families what's their cultural background, the languages they speak, and you find out that information and you use it within the context of the programs that you design for children. They allow hard questions to be asked by children and educators. You know, they invite children and welcome children to ask some difficult questions. So why is that child's, why is that her skin that colour? And we welcome those questions so that we can help children to understand what's going on in that context. And we give accurate information to children in that context. We also encourage children to feel comfortable about expressing their difference. So we want to say, this is what I look like and this is what you look like, and we start to talk to each other about what those differences look like. So we welcome those differences. We also promote children's natural curiosity about difference. I'm just going to get a glass of water. We also make sure that children, when they are curious about difference, we support conversations with them so that they can share some of those ideas with us. We want to ensure that children gain knowledge of different cultural backgrounds. So we want to share some of those things with children, give them opportunities to see different things in the world. This is why family daycare, when you're allowed out, to go out into the community, we want to see some opportunities for children to participate in different cultural events, perhaps in your local community. And of course, you can share some of the things that are important to you. Many of your own cultural understandings can be shared with children. So that's about food and culture and celebrations and things that you value that are important in your family daycare home. Of course, family daycare has got a fantastic opportunity to share that because you're in someone's home, so you can really get access to some of those things. We also want to children to gain knowledge about different cultural practices and develop skills at communicating with children from different cultural backgrounds other than their own. So figuring out what it means for some families to enjoy some things that are particularly important to them, some cultural celebrations, and be able to share that information. We want to ensure that children understand that although the dominant cultures and ethnicities in Australia is Anglo, and it might be the dominant language is English, they're not necessarily the only things that are happening in our communities. These are not inherently better or more important than anything else, and they're part of the rich mix of cultural and language identity in Australia. We recognise the privilege that white children have and families have, and discrimination that has occurred over the years that result in this privilege being perpetuated. So we understand what privilege looks like, and we ensure that children learn that racism hurts and that it needs to be addressed, and racism can make children feel excluded and like they don't belong. And some of you may have had direct experience of that, so you'll be able to share some of that directly with children and their families. Remember that there's lots of resources out there that can help you with cultural competency, lots of people who can share ideas about the different perspectives. And can I take a minute to also here remind you to check out the further readings that you can have a look at, and you can see the links there on the screen. These are really helpful. We've noticed that not everybody is downloading those, so we want to really encourage you to go and have a look at those, because they will help you build your cultural competency over time. So make sure you check them out. Make sure you comment about what you think about them online, and then it helps the Family Daycare New South Wales team to develop resources into the future. So comment and let us know what you think about some of those resources. Here's a whole collection. There's heaps of resources and materials, and we also know that there's fantastic children's books around that can actually help to explore the different cultural identities of the children that you have and the broader Australian community. So the book also suggests that you explore the physical environment. So think about the resources and materials that you set out for children, so that they can start to explore the spaces that they're in. And I've been into several family daycare homes in my experience that are rich with cultural experiences that help children to understand that the world is not exactly the same as the one that they live in, and that they get to see a whole range of different things. They also might hear a language other than English spoken in that home, which is fantastic. So indeed, if you speak a language other than English, make sure you share that with the children. So what's that environment look like? It's going to be full of resources that look like this, but it would be about welcoming anyone who walks through the door. So say sending messages very clearly that people are welcome. So the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flag is a really good way of welcoming Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families. A range of resources and equipment from many cultures that show different types of materials. I remember going to one family daycare educator's home, and she had beautiful fabric that she had brought with her from Somalia, and she used that in the family daycare home in really rich ways. So the children wrapped up babies, they were making cubbies with them, amazing. But children were able to experience that beautiful fabric that she had brought with her from Somalia. And children got a really rich example of what that material meant to her. And of course, she was dressed in a way that looked very similar to some of the material that the children were using, but a great way to introduce children to a different way of understanding the world, a different way of being a part of the world. Resources and the materials should enable children to learn about diverse cultures, pictures, books, as I said, lots of fabrics and dolls and a whole range of resources that could be now included, some of which you can get in the community that you're part of, and some of you could ask the families to contribute to those things potentially, or some of them may be part of your own home. So sharing some of those resources and building that little collection of resources over time is fantastic. A culturally competent service would employ educators who strive to be culturally competent. So you would ask educators about that at the beginning of their employment, that they're interested in culture other than their own, and they want to explore those different options, and they reflect the services community. So you would start to recruit people who actually were part of the family daycare service and similar to the communities of which you're a part. Culturally competent family daycare educators foster relationships with children that would be unbiased and free of racism. So again, we would need to think about our biases, think about racism, what does it mean for the Australian community, and perhaps have some of those conversations with your colleagues. Committed to developing, we want to be committed to developing culturally competent children, so helping them to understand the ways that they interact with the world and celebrate and value difference. We want to foster children's understanding of bias and racism and cultural diversity, what's fair and what's unfair. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, how do I do that with very young children? Well, you might be in a circumstance where children are gathered around at a mealtime and you hear a comment from a child. one of the things that we want family daycare educators to do is to sometimes challenge children's assumptions. Do it respectfully, of course, and ways that are developmentally appropriate for the children that you work with. But we want to say, actually, that may be not true. You know, a child might say one thing about a particular child or a family, and you might say, actually, that's the same for me too. So that we could say that we have some differences in common and we have some similarities in common. So you've got opportunities incidentally. And the service, as well as family daycare educators, support children to stand up for themselves and others in the face of injustice. So some of those things are tricky, but we want to help children to raise concerns and questions about the way that they might be treated or other people might be treated. So respectful relationships. Culturally competent services foster relationships with families as well, and that we would want to make sure that families felt welcomed and included, and we want to share with them the things we're doing to build our cultural competency. And we would want to make sure that services would foster relationships with families that reflect the educators that are open to learning about different ways of raising children and everyday cultural practices. So in that regard, we're asking families about what they believe and understand, what their values are, their cultural heritage, and the things that are important to them in their cultural identity at the beginning of our work with them. So we have mechanisms to hear from families who that can share that information with us. So as we're going, just a thing to note, please make sure you share your questions with us. Wendy's in the background here. She'll start to monitor some of those. If you have any difficulties, please share those questions in the chat as we go. So I can see quite a few of you are mentioning a few things in the chat. Great to have questions coming through. If you have any difficulties as you're navigating this process, then of course get in touch with New South Wales Family Daycare. So let's keep going and see where we're going to next. One of the things that's important in this process here is understanding that, of course, the anti-bias goals, again, some of you may have experienced this, and you'll see a little bit about this in the reading and the materials that we've sent to you, are an important part of our commitment to ensuring that we build a stronger sense of cultural competency and a more inclusive family daycare approach over time, and that we also build our own individual family daycare commitments, individual educator commitments to ensuring we have an inclusive community, as well as services thinking a bit about that. So can I share a couple of ideas with you about these big anti-bias goals? Some of you may have seen them before, and they become a very important part of thinking about inclusion in early childhood education in the Australian context. They are broad goals specifically designed to help guide those people who are thinking about eliminating bias from our education and care services. Bias, of course, is any beliefs or attitudes and that arise to justify unfair treatment because of gender, culture, race, sexuality, family, age, ability, etc. So just let's quickly go through these, because I think it's really important that we think about these goals as something that you might want to consider as you're thinking about becoming more culturally competent. Now, for those of you who are joining us on a podcast, you might want to take a little moment to jot down a couple of thoughts about this and go back and have a look at the material back online so that you can get a bit more clarity about it. Those of you who are joining us live, again, think about what that might look like for you in your individual family daycare service or as an individual family daycare educator in your home. So goal 1, each child will demonstrate self-awareness, confidence, family pride, and positive social identities. So this would be family daycare educators really supporting children to feel good about their own cultural background. You've got to know about what that background is, and then make sure children have space and time and the resources and materials to enact their own identity and to celebrate that and to feel strong about that. So self-awareness. And this is about making sure that we know children's names, that we understand how to pronounce children's names. I know it's a tiny little thing, but it's such an important thing about children's identity. We figure out how to spell children's whole name. We ask families about that. We help children to understand what it means to be part of their family and how the important celebrations are that are important, for example, in their family. So we think of different ways we can help children to recognise and celebrate their own cultural identity. Goal 2 is that each child will express comfort and joy with human diversity. So different ways of doing things. So this is not your identity, this is everybody else around you, which is one of the great joys about family daycare, is that you're in a little group where you can get to know other children who are different from you, and that we use accurate language for human differences and that we have deep, caring human connections. So we want to really think about how children build that relationship with each other. We talked about relationships as critical in cultural competency. It's helping children to build positive relationships. Family daycare educators are really important in that process because they can help children understand the other children's perspectives. Each child will increasingly, goal 3, each child will increasingly recognise unfairness, and they will have the language that they need to describe unfairness, and they will understand that unfairness hurts. Now, of course, for some children, this is something that they learn a little bit older. So they might be 2 and 3 when they start to be able to do this, and 4 by the time they can articulate that fully. But we start early in the conversations about helping children to feel strong about their own culture, appreciate other children and other families' culture, and then feel like they're confident to stand up to bias and to be able to describe something that's unfair and fair. Of course, many of you will have heard children describe things as fair and unfair. In fact, we've got children who have got a very strong sense of the ways in which we understand fairness and unfairness. So many children have a very strong sense of this. And also, we know that each child will demonstrate in the 4th goal, the last goal of these anti-bias goals, that each child will demonstrate empowerment and the skills to act alone and with others against prejudice and discrimination. They will take action in that space. And this is about children being able to stand up to situations that are not right and not fair. And of course, over time, with your assistance as family daycare educators, children will demonstrate that empowerment and get more skills over time. So this is something that is about action and advocacy, and it's also about saying they can be proactive in looking after the well-being of themselves and others in that space and act accordingly to change the situation. So celebrating and being a part of things that are related to cultural competency, goal 1, being a part of that conversation with other children, goal 2, helping us to recognise the language that we need, goal 3, helps us then to be able to enact goal 4, which is actually making sure that we have empowered children who feel like they can take action in the face of prejudice. Now, again, some of these ideas may be relatively new to you. You might not think that the children can be involved in that, but I know many children have a deep sense of what is okay and what is not okay, what is fair and what is not fair in their local community. And you might be able to have some of those conversations with children and families that give you different ideas and strategies to use over time. So there's lots of different ways we can think about cultural competency. And one of the things that's important to me is it's not just about ethnicity. I think sometimes that's a bit of a trap. We think it's just about whether you are like me, have English and Irish heritage. It's not just about that. It's important to remember that at this stage, we're thinking about ethnicity on this webinar, and culture is not just about race or ethnicity. It's about the things we talk about that are broader than that. It's much wider. It's about attitudes and habits and norms and beliefs and behaviours and customs and rituals and artefacts and the things you value and the things you don't value. So just to give you a little bit of example of myself, my grandmother absolutely valued Sunday meal together. So sitting together on Sunday and coming together to eat lunch together was a very, very high importance to her. Why? Because that was something that she did when she was little, and it became a very big particular part of our cultural expression. And Sunday lunches, and for her, it happened after church. She went to church and we had lunch together after that. It became a very important part of our cultural identity. Now, one of the interesting things to me is that over time, sometimes cultural things change. So I don't do that as much anymore. Sometimes I do, but sometimes I don't. And for me, some other things that are now an important part of my cultural life are things that I find important. So for me, I would probably much rather to cook some Thai food, because I do quite like Thai food. And I would say Thai food is now a really important part of my cultural identity. And I like to do that celebratory cooking with my family that is not quite different to what my grandmother envisaged. So culture shifts over time, which is really exciting. So we have to be careful about making stereotypes and saying all families do this, because of course we incorporate different parts of the world in which we live into our cultural identity. So the children we work with now might have a very different cultural life than their families might have had originally, or their parents might have had when they first arrived to Australia, or in fact, in my case, over generations. People are different in terms of gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic backgrounds, subcultures, education, a whole range of things build up your cultural identity. And they can all have strong cultural backgrounds and cultural beliefs that form who we are. Being culturally competent means having the will and taking the actions we need to be able to build understandings between people, to be respected, to be open to different cultural perspectives, and to work towards equality in an opportunity for all people, regardless of the differences that they have, their differences in gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, all those different things, geography. And the anti-bias goals can equally be applied to a whole range of different things. That can be applied to gender, sexuality, family, age, and ability. So there's a whole range of places where those anti-bias goals might go. Great things to think about. If you haven't thought about those very much so far, then they're really good ways of thinking about how you can strengthen your practice in family daycare. So what we'd also want to do, and this is get to the bit of the pointy end of the conversations around the work that we do in cultural competency, is to talk about something that's sometimes a bit tricky to talk about, is the idea of racism. Now, for some of you, you understand this quite deeply because you might have had personal experience about that, for which I'm very sorry because it's very hurtful. And some of us are very privileged not to have experienced that before. So we need to think a little bit about that. It's a big question in the Australian community, something where we need to talk about as an Australian community. So therefore, it's an important part of family daycare practice. So let's just have a little quick think about what we mean by racism. And there's some really good materials and resources that again, in your booklet that can help you point in direction of just exploring some of those ideas together. And you might want to do your own research and maybe you want to have a conversation with your colleagues about this because it's a really interesting topic of conversation. It may also be raised from time to time with the families that you work with. They might have had experience of this and therefore coming to family daycare is an important part of them to feel safe and secure with their children. So defining racism, it's got a couple of things that we need to consider here. The institutional or structural racism is something that happens in the organisations that are part of our community. So inequities that are built in to the social, political and economic systems such as housing, justice, labour, education, healthcare, immigration. So for a practical example of that is a enrolment, a registration form that you have to fill in when you go to the hospital, for example, that's always in English. So it makes it difficult for people who speak a language other than English to complete that process. So it's a bit of structures that doesn't help people to actively participate. Cultural racism is ideologies or beliefs that are embedded in language, symbols in the media and assumptions that are played out in the larger community. So basically it's what you see in the media and the television. It's sort of ways of doing things that are progressed as the only way of doing things. All the different people on the television that often don't look like you. It's a way of understanding that we particularly embed language and symbols and media and assumptions in the larger community, that we progress those ideas across the platforms that we experience. And the last one is interpersonal, individual experiences of bias or discrimination during everyday social interactions. And unfortunately, we see a little bit of that played out on social media. We see some examples in the public domain, very, very concerning, and they leave scars on the Australian community. It's something we want to support children to not be a part of into the future. And a really interesting conversation that you might want to have with your colleagues about the experience of racism on an interpersonal, cultural or institutional level. It does require deep thinking, these ideas, and they can be really challenging. So if these things have concerned you, please reach out to the people around you to have a conversation around how you're travelling in relation to these things, particularly if you've experienced some of these things. So what we're going to do now is hear from a bit of an expert who's going to share some thoughts with us about racism. So I'm going to share this video with you and we'll see whether these things give you some further insights.
Hey, little 8-year-old Taika, how's it going? Don't bother answering. You can't because you're just an old photo. And this is a made-up thing using computers and technology and nerds and stuff. Listen, younger old photo version of me, you don't know it yet, but you can be great. You've got something no other kid has, a benevolent future version of yourself talking to you. And take it from your future self. Right now, you're being taught some pretty harsh lessons, and it isn't fair. I know everyone thinks you stole Tommy's shoes, and who's Tommy, you ask? Well, we can't use Maddie's real name. I mean, Johnny. Samantha. Well, I reckon they're going to be pretty bummed out when he finds those shoes tomorrow by the pool. And I know your English teacher said he wasn't expecting much of your English because you're not English. But I like your stories. And who knows, one day your storytelling might mean you get to work with some of the world's most overpaid actors. And forget about being accused of being a glue sniffer or stealing lunches or that you're brown because you don't take baths. Europeans didn't take baths until like 1962. Please don't listen when they say opportunities are limited for Māori actors. It's acting. You literally just have to remember words and try to say them convincingly. You've been made to believe you're not trustworthy, you're trouble, that you won't add up to much, but you'll prove them all wrong. You've got this, little me. You've got this. If only you could see how much you're worth. And if only every kid who was destined to not fulfill their potential because of cultural stereotypes and assumptions about their minority race had a successful and benevolent future self that could travel through the space-time continuum and encourage them with motivational wisdom like I'm doing right now with this little guy. Unfortunately, that isn't possible. And that wasn't my wise advice to 8-year-old me. It just sounded like me because it was me reading it in my own voice, convincingly, using acting. In actual fact, it was 2 of my teachers, Ms. Kennedy and Mr. Callis, or maybe I should call them unteachers. They made sure I learned all of that, so I wasn't left believing all the crazy stuff society teaches kids about race. If it wasn't for them, I'd probably still be this shy little 8-year-old kid over here, this guy, with a beautiful, angelic, just painfully beautiful face. As teachers, you've got the real-life ability to make a difference for kids in the face of racism. There are so many things their benevolent and successful future selves would love to go back and unteach them, but you're the ones who can choose to do that in real time, now. You have the power to unteach racism. Will you? No, but will you?
Well, fantastic video opportunity there for us to think about the ways in which racism can stop with you. And there's some very good work happening here in Australia and indeed with our colleagues in Aotearoa, New Zealand, about the way in which we can really challenge us to think more deeply about our understanding of race and ethnicity and some of the context of the work that we do on a daily basis. So, and one of the exciting things we have now is an opportunity to hear a bit more from various people who can help the expert conversation take place. So it is now my absolute pleasure to continue the conversation, this time focusing on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives. So again, something that I know many of you are thinking about and exploring in detail. So I'd like to really encourage you to think more and more about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives in your work. So learning about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives is an important part of what we are committed to in the ASEQA context. And we're going to hear just in a minute from Jess Staines, who's going to tell us a little bit more about some of the work practically that we might include into our work. But before we do that, I want to encourage you to check out some of the work that ASEQA talks about, and some of you will know very much about this work, that fostering children's understanding and respect for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and challenging bias can impact on children's future attitudes towards cultural diversity. All educators have the potential to make a significant difference towards national reconciliation and First Nations peoples feeling respected. So these images that you're seeing in front of you give you a sense of the diverse contribution that our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters have made to the Australian community. The Victorian government has produced a practice guide for educators about equity and diversity and explains differently. It says in that document that there is evidence that many non-Aboriginal children and adults have limited knowledge of or misunderstandings about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives, communities and culture. They have many images of Aboriginal people that are not accurate or outdated, and they are not consistent with some of the images that you can see in front of you. For example, many people believe that most Aboriginal people live traditional lifestyles in remote parts of the country, when in fact they're around the corner. However, while this is the case for some Aboriginal people, most Aboriginal people live in urban urban environments and have diverse lifestyles, just like you. And the educators also can take a moment to respect the understandings of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and cultures in different ways, including using photographs. And again, Jess is going to talk to us a little bit more about some of these ideas, and photographs of contemporary Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, like you can see in the images in front of you, and thinking about the ways that you can explore different ways of understanding the world in which we live. Aboriginal people contributing to teaching and sport and art and dance and theatre and part of the community more broadly. Inviting Aboriginal elders to be part of the conversations that you have in your family daycare service. And again, some of you really explored that. Thinking about Indigenous plants and country in your local area. Walking out on country is a really important part of what you might do. Embedding Aboriginal stories, storytelling and music into programs using books and resources. Again, plenty of things out there now that you might be able to access. Again, if you've got some really good resources, love to hear about them. Fantastic comments in the chat, so keep those coming. If you're using some particular resources that you think are really helpful, use the Family Daycare PD in Your Pocket Facebook page to share some ideas about things that you find really helpful. And of course, celebrating NAIDOC and is also celebrating the National Aboriginal and Islander Children's Day of Celebration. So there's lots of different things that are an important part of that work. Again, the World Wide Web gives you a whole range of different ways to explore some of these ideas. So check out the Family Daycare PD in Your Pocket Facebook page, and you'll see and options there, and share some different things that you might be exploring in your own practice. One of the things that I note in my work around around Australia is that these resources and materials are much more accessible than they ever have been. So local libraries are really good places to connect with. Local councils are really good places to connect with. Talk to people in your local community. Build those relationships with the local Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people in your community. So again, as I said before, we're going to not only explore these ideas in theory, but we're also going to think and talk to experts who can share some of these ideas with us. So this is where we get to hear from the amazing Jessica Staines. So she's going to share some ideas with us that help us understand the perspectives of incorporating First Nations perspectives into our work in family daycare. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Jessica.
Hello and welcome. Welcome, Jessica Staines from Curriculum. How are you, Jess? I'm really pleased to have you on today.
Yeah, really good. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
That's okay. So please tell me, what do you think cultural competence is in a family daycare setting?
So I ended up moving away a little bit from the term cultural competence because I think for a lot of educators, assuming competence in a culture that predominantly probably isn't their own is a bit of a big task, I feel. And there's a lot of things in Aboriginal people's culture that we're not necessarily willing to share openly with people that are non-Indigenous. So instead, the terms that I began using is cultural capacity and cultural confidence. So I think for educators to really understand their role as non-Indigenous educators and be, I guess, dedicated and dogmatic in a sense to continue to learn about Aboriginal culture is really important. So understanding it's a journey and there's not necessarily one destination. But in terms of family daycare educators, I think it's the same necessarily as, early childhood educators, where we're really trying to just sprinkle those cultural perspectives across play spaces and holistically program and plan around children's interest to be including Aboriginal perspectives in context to whatever they're interested in.
Okay, that sounds great, but how do you actually do it? Like, what's the best way of teaching children in a family daycare setting about, Aboriginal culture? How can it be done in a way that just isn't tokenistic?
I think tokenistic and stereotypical and being offensive are words that really haunt educators. And I find that a lot of educators suffer from a form of analysis paralysis. They're so worried about doing the wrong thing that they tend to do nothing at all. I think whether or not an experience is token or not has really nothing to do with the tabletop resources that you have. You can have really elaborate setups or something that's very basic, but whether or not they're meaningful really has everything to do with what's happening intrinsically within the educator, whether or not they value the importance of doing what they're doing. If they're just doing it to tick a box or because it's NAIDOC week, then yeah, it probably is token. But if they understand the importance of including and embedding Aboriginal perspectives, then I think we have to unburden ourselves and be generous with ourselves and understand that we all have to start somewhere. We have to start where we feel comfortable and confident, and quite often in relation to Aboriginal culture, that's with experiences that could be considered touristy or that surface level. So, you know, listening to the didgeridoo or reading dreaming stories or doing some dot painting with children, because that's what educators most commonly know about Aboriginal people in our culture, and that's where they feel comfortable to start. So I think there's nothing wrong with that, but eventually we need to develop our cultural capacity and start looking a little bit more broadly to consider ways that we can balance that out and include both traditional and contemporary perspectives, urban and regional perspectives, and local perspectives in our program. So, and I think you build that capacity and that confidence as time goes on, and it's just like anything else we do in early childhood. Whether we start with a certificate 3, a diploma, or a teaching degree, the real work begins on the floor with children, and it's only through repetition and critical reflection that our practice begins to grow, and we get better at doing whatever it is that we're setting out to achieve with children. So by connecting with others, by engaging in online forums, by listening to podcasts, by reading Black literature, by attending community events, these are all ways that educators will begin to learn more about Aboriginal culture and see the links. I think it's probably important that we don't teach about Aboriginal people and culture as if we are a topic, a theme, or an interest. I think that can be quite tricky. So we don't want to be tacked on and separate, but instead really just be considering, so if the children are interested in transport, what could the Aboriginal perspectives of transport be? And just start small. So nobody is an encyclopedia of Aboriginal knowledge. Google searching can be a little bit tricky, but try and find those safe online spaces where you know that there's a supportive community for you to turn to and ask for advice. So we have a Facebook group called the Koori Curriculum Educator Community, which family daycare educators are more than welcome to join and be a part of. And they can post in there and say, this week the children are interested in fairies. Can anyone help me with what the Aboriginal perspectives would be? We're more than willing to help.
Look, I love that idea of, you know, embedding it across everything. And it's, I know for educators it can be hard to do that, but I hate it when that, you know, NAIDOC week comes up or Aboriginal Children's Day and everyone suddenly goes, oh no, what are we going to do? For a lot of our educators, family daycare educators, perhaps even more so than the rest of the sector, have a wide multicultural background. And so a lot of them haven't grown up in Australia and know even less than white Australians know about Aboriginal culture. What's the best way for people in that situation to learn about Aboriginal culture?
Yeah, I think engaging in professional development workshops definitely helps, but attending some Aboriginal organisations or exhibits within your community, so trying to get out, so whether those are museums, galleries, during NAIDOC week and Reconciliation week, these are perfect times and opportunities for you to get out into your community and make those connections. There's often free talks happening at libraries during that period, or gatherings that are taking place. So, you know, going onto the Reconciliation Week or NAIDOC website and putting in your postcode and seeing what's happening near you, subscribing to the Koori Mail, which is our national fortnightly newspaper, and looking at programs and events that are happening. So I think it's through that ongoing engagement. I also think potentially that educators that haven't had their schooling in Australia, they're coming into it in a great position, really, because a lot of, you know, white Australians that did do their schooling here, they're going through a process of unlearning and relearning because they were taught a false history or not an accurate depiction of Aboriginal people. And I find that, you know, educators from overseas, particularly First Nations peoples from overseas, they can relate to Aboriginal culture on a different level. And there's definitely synergy between First Nations people in Australia and other First Nations people, you know, around the world. So I think it's just really seeing it as being achievable, that it does take time, that there's no one book or workshop or community event, but just being determined and persistent, I think, is what's really key.
Jess, you alluded earlier about analysis paralysis, which I thought was a really good way of saying it. What advice can you give those educators that feel like they don't know enough, or that they don't know where to start, or that they're just really, really worried about doing it wrong?
I think it's really rare that anyone is going to come down on you if you're giving it a go. So I think it's better to do something than nothing at all, as long as you're coming into it with that genuine respect and that open mind and that willingness to learn. One of the things that I generally, advise educators to do is they could always put a note out to families or somewhere in their the entry to their homes that says, I'm really passionate about wanting to embed Aboriginal perspectives, but I'm not an expert. So if you have feedback or you have suggestions, please let me know. So coming into that position of not claiming expertise, but just be really humble and open to listening and learning and having that feedback. Something that I find is a really helpful resource for family daycare educators is to register for their own reconciliation action plans, and they can do this as a cluster, so with 2 or 3 other family daycare educators that potentially you can all working together and support one another. And we do that through an online platform called Narragansett, which is part of Reconciliation Australia. And what this does is it tells you what you should be doing, why you should be doing it, but it gives you lots of strategies and ideas. There's lots of readings, curriculum resources, free webinars. There's a wealth of information there. So, just working your way through that over a period of time, I think is really worth the investment into that platform.
Sure. I presume that some family daycare schemes already have a scheme-wide reconciliation action plan, but some may not, and it's still a good idea for individual educators to have their own.
That's right, and often it will complement what the scheme is doing, and the scheme is then better able to support those family daycare educators when they're able to understand what their goals are.
Yep. Just one final question. Can you talk about some of the best practice you've seen? It might be centre-based or might be individual family daycare educator-based. What sorts of things they'd be doing?
Yeah, so I think some of the best practices that I've seen are with family daycare educators where they're out and about in the community, that during NAIDOC week, reconciliation week, or they've just got their finger on the pulse with, things that are happening on a weekly or monthly basis. They're out and about with the children, engaging them in community events, so facilitating relationships for children with First Nations people. Also, I think educators that try to find ways to include Aboriginal perspectives in children's interests on a regular basis. So you're not having to do it for each and every interest that comes about, but just being mindful and always considering, what are the cultural perspectives of this? How can we, what books might exist that can complement what the children are doing? And I think, we don't have to have heaps of resources, and sometimes it can be just as simple as saying, did you know that Aboriginal people used to follow ants to find water when the children are interested in insects? So it doesn't always have to be a resource or a big play-based experience or something huge. It's just those little simple, statements that we're making to children on a regular basis that I find have meaning. Yeah.
And I think that's why it's really important for educators to take it on themselves to learn about Aboriginal culture, because if you didn't know that the thing about ants, then you couldn't introduce it to children. So it's first of all educating yourself.
Yeah, and it's beyond just learning about the history. It's learning about all those little cultural things so we can find those links, as you say. So please feel free to join our Curriculum Facebook group, because there's a wealth of resources in there.
So if people just search Curriculum on Facebook?
So if they search Curriculum Educator Community on Facebook, they'll find us. It's in the group section. It's separate to our Facebook page. So, they're more than welcome to join. And, when those interests do come up and you're not sure what the Aboriginal perspective is of frogs or out of space or houses, just put a post in there and the community is more than happy to assist you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining us, Jess. I really appreciate it.
No worries. Good luck, everybody. Thanks again for having me.
Well, great bit of conversation there and interesting information that we've got from Jess. So really, if you want to go back and have a look at that and listen to it again, there's lots of really great ideas there. Jess has got so many different perspectives, but some of those things might be really new to you. And I think I've seen quite a number of you chatting in the chat, which is fantastic for giving some advice and support and ideas to each other. But I love the idea there that Jess says, just get started, try some things, reach out to people, start talking about different ideas and see where it takes you. Talk to your own families in your community as well about the things that they might suggest. So again, we're now very fortunate to be joined also by another expert who can share some ideas with us this time. So we have a conversation. Lisa is in conversation with Many. So I'm going to share her information.
I'm really excited to have it with me today, Many Zambunaris. Many's been working in cultural competency and education care services for years and years, and you're currently working with an organisation called Diversity Kids, is that right?
Correct, Lisa, yes, spot on. Love the way you pronounce my surname, it's spot on, perfect.
It's one of those things that's very hard, but if I'm going to be culturally competent, it's the least I can do.
Absolutely.
Tell us a bit about Diversity Kids. What's Diversity Kids?
Yeah, Diversity Kids, I'm co-founder and co-manager of Diversity Kids, and we set it up a few years ago, Lisa. And what we do is we run all sorts of inclusion programs to make sure that children's services have access to programs that will help ensure that all their children are included. We have ethnic workers on board, speech pathologists on board, behaviour specialists, special ed consultants. So it's a pool of professionals that services can tap into and help all children become included. But before that, I think like you, lived and breathed inclusion through many of the Commonwealth inclusion support programs. You're one of the people I know that remembers and knows what I'm talking about when I say that I managed a subs program a long time ago.
I'm feeling very old now.
That was decades ago. And I've also had, I was very, very privileged to deliver the New South Wales bicultural support program for many years. And I think I'm an author, a trainer, a consultant, and I love developing resources around cultural inclusion. So that's me in a nutshell.
And she does it really well too.
Thank you.
So what do you think that cultural competency is in a family daycare setting?
I love that question. My favourite question. And cultural competence, it's that term that gets thrown around so often, doesn't it, Lisa? But how many of us actually really think about it, what it is, and reflect on whether we're doing it and how we actually do it? Cultural competence, it's referred to in the frameworks quite a lot. And in the early years learning framework, I've actually pulled up the description so that I could let you know. It's described in the early years learning framework as much more than an awareness of cultural differences. It's the ability to understand, to communicate with, and effectively interact with people across cultures. And I love that. But I have another layer to cultural competence that I'd like to add to that. Cultural competence for me in family daycare means that as educators, as family daycare educators, you recognise that all children are cultural beings. They come to your family daycare settings with a very strong cultural identity. Sometimes you might not even realise that they have these strong cultural identities, but they are informed in lots of different ways through their child rearing practices, for example, the knowledge. Sometimes they come out with things and you think, oh, that's probably cultural. Some of their values, probably the most obvious things in family daycare, in children's services, would be things like attitude to play. A lot of that is cultural. Things like sleeping arrangements, toileting, feeding, and the other obvious things, the celebrations and the cultures and the festivals that we celebrate with the children. So cultural competence to me is recognising all that you have these cultural beings and embracing that and nurturing it and actually using that and putting it into practice in your family daycare settings. So you're creating that bridge, that cultural bridge, and bringing it into your family daycare environment. You're learning about the families and the cultures and the children and the way they do things, and you're communicating and getting all that knowledge and using it in practice. That is, for me, cultural competence. A lot of people, Lisa, when they think about cultural competence, what they think is, okay, it's things like this. It's my resources, the cultural resources. You know, we invite our Aboriginal elders to come in and support us with our rap or Acknowledgement of Country. You know, they play the didgeridoo. We translate for our families that don't understand English. We bring in bilingual educators when the children, you know, struggling with language. We celebrate all those festivals. Spot on. That is one part of cultural competence, but there's another part. See, this part that I just described is the visible part. It's the tangible things that we see, that we do. There's another part, goes back to what I was talking about earlier, and it's got to do with our knowledge. It's got to do with our attitudes towards diversity and what we do with that. You know, the communicating, the cross-cultural communications, the building relationships with the called children and families. So pulling it all together. The two aspects that I've just described, pulling it together, that's cultural competence for me. And one, because I can go on and on, if you like, about cultural competence, but one last thing that I wanted to highlight about cultural competence, people think it's a destination. It's somewhere that you go to, that you get to, and it's not. I like to think of it as a journey, an ongoing reflection journey that you do every day. Cultural competence differs from person to person. Your cultural experience, Lisa, will be very different to mine. It differs from situation to situation, in family daycare setting from family daycare setting, and it differs from opportunity to opportunity. That's the key word, you know, in cultural competence, opportunity. You grab the cultural opportunities that come your way and you learn from it and you grow from it and you implement and you put these things into practice. So that's my take on cultural competence.
Look, I don't think that it's something that anyone ever actually becomes culturally competent. It's not like, okay, I've got this now and I'm really culturally competent, because what happens, you meet someone from a different culture and it hits against all of your prejudice and all of the views that you've been brought up with, and suddenly you go, oh, okay, I've just got to work out what's happening here.
Absolutely. Like, I've been in this field for decades, and I can say that I learned something new from the kiddies, from, about cultures every day. Just recently, I knew it. There was something in the back of my mind that I had to research. I had to find out a little bit more. The language Bengali. I started consulting with some of our educators and discovered that Bengali is spoken in Bangladesh, but it's also spoken in India from people living in Bengal. And although the dialect is the same, it's similar, it's actually quite different. And when you're talking about these two different countries, you're also talking about different religions. So it's really important to ask these questions and to find out things, especially when you're working with children and families.
One of the things that is really important about cultural competence is, having respect for cultural differences. How can a family daycare educator help teach children to respect, and understand cultural differences?
That's a really important question, Lisa. And as family daycare educators, we're in a position to be able to do that from a very early age, to teach all those important things and to nurture them and instill them in children. Things like an appreciation of diversity, of different cultures, of respect, of things like kindness, even things like, anti-bias and social justice. So we're in a really good position as family daycare educators to do that. We have this really lovely quote from Diversity Kids, and I brought a copy to show you today. I think it summarises all in a nutshell. Inclusive practice in early childhood creates future inclusive citizens and children, right? So, we live and breathe diversity and multiculturalism in Australia. Did you know that 1 in 4 of us were born overseas? 200 different languages spoken. So what happens? These are the children and the families that end up in our family daycare settings. So we need to start educating children about the cultures that are out there, but also, making children in our family daycare environments feel good about their cultures. And one of the things that I've noticed about doing this sort of cultural practice in family daycare in any children's service type, every single time without fail, there's so many wonderful things going on, but the two that stand out for me, Lisa, are children from those particular cultural backgrounds. They experience this cultural self-esteem, this pride, cultural safety, sense of belonging. So I've witnessed it, and now I actually look for it whenever we go into children's services, and we take bilingual workers with us, or we immerse them in bilingual or cultural programs, or whatever we do, you know, an incursion. The children from those particular cultural backgrounds, their faces light up. You know, their eyes are just, and they're looking around at their peers and they're going, oh, is this really happening? So it makes them feel pretty special. And a lot of the time, educators actually come out and tell us, never seen interaction like that before, that they're actually engaged. And that speaks volumes. And then the other beautiful thing that's happening is all other children, if you're doing inclusion well, cultural inclusion well, all the other children are learning something too. And the message is that
the best way of kind of teaching children about other cultures. Yeah.
What's the best way of teaching? Is that what you asked?
Yeah.
Resources for me is the number one. We have to be very careful in the resources that we select. And I like to share with services that when you're using resources with children, it's really important that, you know, whether they're books, whether they're posters, whether they're dolls, the children need to be able to look at these resources and see mirrors in them so that they can relate, and it makes them feel good because it represents them, who they are. But these resources also need to be windows. So when you open the windows, they get the opportunity to look out and see what's going on in their world. The best way to introduce these sorts of programs is by doing, by experiencing, by actually consulting with the children, by bringing in the families and working with them, getting them to share, you know, ideas and cultural practices, and also consulting with the community and getting people to come in and share their cultures. But I think the key word for me when it comes to cultural inclusion and doing it best is embedding cultural perspectives. And by that, I mean building them in, having them there everywhere, every day, and not even making a big deal about it, Lisa. Like, you know, you're doing some paper folding and you don't have to highlight, this is a craft that we do in Japan. You know, kids are doing it. Someone might come out and say, oh, my mum does this at home, and there's your opportunity to have that conversation. Embedding is also, I like to think of embedding as a seamless type of approach. So when you're introducing culture in your services, it should be flowing. It's seamless. It's from child to child, from room to room, from day to day. It's there every day, everywhere. Okay. Yeah, that's the way I would deliver cultural programs. I just lost it there.
I think that's good because it's doing it in a way that isn't kind of tokenistic, and it's saying, you know, if we're learning about gardening, for example, then we can look at, you know, what's important in a range of different countries, how they garden, why they garden, what crops they might grow. Or we could also look at, you know, how do the original owners of Australia, Aboriginal people, what do they believe about the land that we're gardening on?
And it's not just about, you know, when I talk about embedding culture, it's not just about introducing cultural activities through art and craft, through cooking, say, or stories or whatever. That's one side of it, but you're spot on, Lisa. Embedding is also about taking any opportunity, any child's interests, and trying to look at it through a cultural lens. And a lot of people think that's so hard. It's just extra work for me, but it's not, because you can look at everything through a cultural lens. And like you said, that example that you gave is perfect. Another one would be, you know, someone's mum might have had a baby. So you use that opportunity to look at it through a cultural lens and start talking about, maybe invite mum in with the baby, talk about the different ways we say baby. You know, how do you say baby in your language? And there's so many resources and visuals out there about babies from around the world. So, yeah, that's a way to do it. You don't want to be tokenistic.
Okay. One of the things that I'm really aware of is that, you know, a huge number of our family daycare educators come from a culture that isn't the dominant Australian culture. should they introduce their own culture to the children they're minding?
I think that's a really, really fantastic idea. And I would say 100% yes. Because just the same way that, you know, we like to include the children's cultures in our program, I'm sure the children and the families love to learn about our cultures too as educators. And I think it's part of the cultural embedding and it's part of our cultural competence journey. I don't know whether many educators actually think about it along this line, Lisa, but when you're on your cultural competence journey and you're reflecting on that, what you're doing, you do realise that you're actually taking the children on your cultural competence journey with you too. So it's about their cultural competence too. So sharing your culture it's a great idea. I'd like to share some examples with you of some services and people that have done it really well, sharing their culture. There was a particular service that just embarked on their cultural competence journey and they thought, how are we going to do this as a team? And what better place to start than through those staff profiles that they put in the entrance area? I know this is a long daycare example, but it's transferable to family daycare. So what they thought was they put the photo up of themselves, a little blurb about their cultural background and what's important to them from their culture, the languages that they speak and their cultural background. So in my case, it would be I'd have an Australian and a Greek flag. I speak English and Greek. And one of the most important things to me about my culture is Easter, celebrating Easter. I've done that as a child and now I'm doing it with my children and family. So it's an ongoing, you know, I'm going to continue that forever because it's very important to me. What do you think happened when the educators started reading about one another? There was all this conversation going on and communication and sharing of experiences and knowledge and, you know, exchange. And then they took that information and built it into the resources and the programming with the children. So the same thing was going on with the children. They started listening to, you know, information about their educators and their cultures, and they started sharing things about what goes on for them at home. And surprise, surprise, the same thing was going on with the families. So once the families read all this information, they started imparting with information about their cultural backgrounds and what was important to them. And you see what happened there? By sharing that cultural information about themselves, they opened up the opportunity for the cultural competence journey throughout the whole service. And they didn't even have to go outside the service. The resources were right there in their environment.
That's a wonderful example, but we know that, you know, some parts of Australia are deeply racist and that educators can face cultural incompetence. What would you suggest to educators if they do face, you know, racism in their work, like whether it be from families or from coordinators or even from children, because we know children can be racist as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, that does still go on, Lisa. I'm hoping not as much as you know in the past, but it does still happen. And what's cultural incompetence? It's exactly the opposite to cultural competence. An example of a culturally incompetent educator to me would be someone that thinks, we don't need these cultural programs. You know, these children are here in Australia now. We do things a particular way. They're not open to change or doing things differently because their way is the way, they think. And sometimes there is evidence of discrimination happening. So if you were one of those educators that experienced that, there are things you could do. I wouldn't walk away from that. You need to act on that. And sometimes you'd also be experiencing racism, as you mentioned, or discrimination in your workplace as an educator, either as an educator or you see it in the playground with the children being discriminatory. I want to share this story with you about what happened last year during the pandemic with children and discrimination on the playground. We had services contacting us and asking things like, oh my goodness, what do we do? Children are excluding other children in the playground using things like, I don't want to play with you, you have the Chinese flu, or I don't want to play with that doll, that's got skin colour like yours, so you can play with that. So my point here, Lisa, is just if you experience that with a child and you saw that happening in the playground, you would act. As an educator, you would act. You would you take the child that showed the discriminatory behaviour and talk to them about that it's not on. What we do, the way we speak to our friend, it hurts their feeling. You'd also check in on the child that, you know, experienced the discrimination and make sure they were okay. And as an educator, you would program along that stuff that we were talking about earlier, diversity and respect and kindness, and speaking up for your friends that, experience something like discrimination or bias. So just the same way you would act when it happens to a child, you would act when it happens to an adult too, especially to you, because if you don't do anything, you're allowing it to happen. That cycle will continue to happen. I think the message that you also give is that it's okay, it could keep happening, and it's not. I'm the sort of person that looks at challenges and negative things like that and turns them upside down and looks at them as opportunities. So it would be an opportunity for an educator to grow, to learn, to do new things.
And to help somebody else become culturally competent.
Absolutely. So what would you do,
part of cultural, like a really important part of cultural competency is examining your own views for racism and prejudice. Yes. And so by saying to someone, hey, that was actually racist, then it can help people understand what that feels like.
And you could, if you felt strong enough about it, you could take it to your management so they, are aware of it. But I would probably take it to a team meeting level and talk about what you've observed, what you've experienced, what you're feeling, and maybe suggest that cultural competence journey, that they all need to come on board and move forward, because you know what, Lisa, there's no room for racism in early childhood, whether it's to do with children or educators, no room for it in early childhood.
For sure. So what would doing culture well in family daycare look like for you? Let's finish off with that one, what, a service that was really doing it well, what would you expect to see? An educator that was really doing it well?
Okay, I call it rocking cultural inclusion in family daycare, rocking it. Yeah. So, a family daycare educator that rocks inclusion is someone that recognises the barriers that these children and families have. And in most cases, for called children and families I'm talking about now, the barriers are language. They don't speak English, so they're not able to participate fully, like maybe all the other children are. And culturally, it's a little bit different, the environment, right? So a family daycare educator rocking inclusion would work out what those barriers are and do whatever they could do to break down these barriers, to remove them so that all the children are participating equally. They'd be rocking cultural inclusion too if they did everything I spoke about earlier, embedding cultural practices every day, everywhere, seamless, looking at everything through that cultural lens, and being able to adapt it. But another really important thing, Lisa, that I've forgotten to actually weave throughout this chat is someone who rocks cultural inclusion reflects on what they do every day and thinks about, okay, by me doing this, programming along these lines, who is benefiting? Who am I advantaging? Is somebody missing out? Should I be doing things differently? So in a nutshell, family daycare educators who rock inclusion are those that educate all children about different cultures, but at the same time, all children in their family daycare environments feel like they're at home and culturally safe.
That's wonderful. Manny, if people wanted to talk to you about what you could do for their service, what's your web address?
Oh, we're at www.diversitykids.com.au, and please join us. We'd love to work with you.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm sure everyone's learned a lot from that.
Thank you for having me, Lisa. Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of our presentation. And wasn't it great to hear all those fantastic practical suggestions from Manny, and the conversation between Lisa and Manny and Lisa and Jess? Great ideas there. You can revisit those and you can find out more ideas and suggestions in that space. So really good opportunity for you to dig deep into those ideas around cultural competency, cultural intelligence, cultural skills that you can bring to your family daycare context. It's now time for us to explore the ideas around your suggestions and to take up some questions from you. So I'm going to check out a little bit about what you've been raising in the chat with us. So thanks very much, everybody who has put questions into the mix here. And I want to suggest here there's an opportunity for you to raise some questions with us. So if you haven't raised a question so far, I know some of you have put in some different suggestions and ideas as we've progressed. So please keep checking that out. So I just want to, before we do that, just a couple of important housekeeping matters before we start to conclude and explore some of those questions. Make sure you look at the further reading. So we know that some of you have checked that out, but others of you haven't quite managed to get to that space. So make sure you check out those readings. They'll give you a plethora of extra information that you would need, and you can really find some more information that gives you some interesting insights. And they'll be sent to you soon, and you can really go and have a look at them and share your thoughts on the Facebook page. And then we really want you to do the survey. Now, some of you have done this before, which is fantastic. So thank you so much if you have completed the survey. Each month we send you a survey, and we experienced that some people haven't really done it. So we really like you to take a bit of a moment to tell us what you like and what you don't like about the PD in your pocket. That what you think works well, what you think doesn't work well. All of that information will help the team at Family Daycare New South Wales to develop professional learning that fits your agenda, what you want to find out more about. If you don't speak up, we don't know about those things. So I really want to hear from you in relation to that. So as I said, now it's time for some questions. I know some of you have posted questions in the chat, and we'll, if you have any more, we'd like you to pop them in there now. And we won't probably get to all of those questions, but let's answer some of the questions that you have in the chat function. So I'm going to go and have a bit of a look at that. So thank you very much, everybody who has asked a couple of questions in that space. I think one of the ones that's come up a couple of times is, how do you raise things with families? How do you start talking about culture components when maybe some of the families have different sort of beliefs and understandings? So it's tricky in that space because you might have a commitment to that, but the families that you work with might not have a commitment. So one of the things that I would suggest is that you're pretty upfront about the inclusion of cultural ideas and cultural perspectives in your family daycare program from the get-go. So make sure it's in your philosophy, make sure it's in the information that you give to families so that they might choose you because you honour and respect those ideas. So being upfront first about that is really important. So opening that space up. And the other thing that I think is important in terms of when families might challenge you on some of those things, remind them about some of the expectations of the National Quality Framework, the National Quality Standard, our commitment to valuing the cultural heritage of children and to explore that cultural identity because it helps to build an inclusive community. So some of those things will be important for you to think about as you build your program. Now, we do appreciate the fact that sometimes these can be tricky conversations, so you might want to check out, have a conversation before you raise some of those things and respond to families with your family daycare educational leader, with your coordination team. Talk to them about some of those. They might help you practice some of the ways that you might respond to families. But at the end of the day, we do want you to challenge some of those biases and prejudices that might come to you from families. Now, we know that that's, again, sometimes a tricky thing to do, so you might need a little bit of practice, but at the end of the day, you have an ethical obligation to address bias and to challenge discrimination and to stand up for the rights and best interests of children. So tricky, but be brave and have a go at it. Do so respectfully, of course. Make sure that your communication with families is respectful and rely on some of the expectations of the National Quality Framework to think about the way that you might incorporate some of those conversations. Now, some of you are asked for a bit more information and connections with some of the materials that we have shared today. So some of that will be in the chat. So check out that space, those spaces. And I think that another question is, how do you figure out whether some of the materials and resources that you're using are appropriate? Now, one of the things that I would say, there's heaps of material out there. So some of you might go to a website or you check out things on Facebook and you think to yourself, I wonder whether that's appropriate. What I would be doing is checking with families, talking to families about those ideas. You may talk to a couple of other colleagues about the types of resources that you buy, because some of those might not be appropriate. They might be outdated or with stereotypes, and therefore the books might have discriminatory ideas in them that you might choose. So check them out, talk to people around them, talk to the families, ask the families about some of the materials and resources that you want to use, and see whether they are appropriate in your context. Remember what Jess said about sometimes you've got to try a few things, make a few mistakes, get a bit of feedback, and then modify your plan over time. But also, we've heard very strongly that the feedback and the ideas that we've heard from many really remind us how important it is to use resources and materials in a way that helps children to explore what it means to understand the engagement with the different cultural perspectives that children and families bring to family daycare. I think one of the other things we might raise, and a couple of you have sort of mentioned sort of recording some of this information, that it's actually fantastic to use some of the cultural experiences that you're offering to children in the way that you document children's learning. So sharing some of the ways that you feel that children are learning about culture and the experiences in your own context is a really fantastic thing to share through your pedagogical documentation, through your normal planning cycle. So find out ways to promote that and make it part of the way that you communicate information with families, and so that families know what you're doing, and so that you can start to incorporate families being part of that conversation. One of the things that I would also suggest is that you talk to families up front about the sorts of things that they would like to share with you from their cultural perspective in a family daycare home. I think we also, many just mentioned it before, how important it was to also engage in reflective practice. And I think some of you have raised sort of the thinking that you've done over the years and what you're thinking about how you might approach multicultural perspectives and how you might embed those ideas. All of that is supported by reflective practice. So it's about joining with your colleagues, joining with your educational leader, joining with your family daycare coordination team to think about the ways in which you might incorporate ideas and perspectives, and where the challenges and biases that might lie, how you might explore those ideas. And some of you are continuing to ask about resources and materials. That's the sort of information that we'd love you to share on the Facebook page, because there's really fantastic ideas there. At the end of the day, cultural competence or cultural acquisition of skills and becoming more respectful in this space is a personal journey, first and foremost, about what you understand and what you believe in, but also it's an opportunity for you to find out new ideas, try new things, and to think about the ways in which you can really strengthen children's experience of cultural competency. So this takes us to the end of our opportunity today. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. It's been a fantastic opportunity for you to all join us. We've got these little collections of people, great conversations in the chat. So thank you so much, everybody, for sharing your thoughts and perspectives. Again, check out the material that's going to be sent to you. Make sure that you complete the evaluation. We really want to find out about that, because that gives you the Family Daycare New South Wales team a bit of an opportunity to figure out what's important for you. Make sure you read the readings, and make sure you go on the Facebook page and share your perspectives with us about the things you're exploring. Thanks, everybody. It's been great to be with you tonight. Have a good rest of the evening. Thank you.